The Whispering Pines. The road twisted and turned like a serpent through the dense forest, its cracked asphalt barely visible under a blanket of fallen pine needles. The air was thick with the scent of resin and decay, and the only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the occasional creak of old trees swaying in the wind. Erin tightened her grip on the steering wheel, her knuckles white as she guided her aging sedan deeper into the forest. She glanced at the map app on her phone, its screen glowing faintly in the dim light of dusk. Whispering Pines was marked as her destination, a tiny dot in the middle of nowhere. The job listing had been vague but enticing. Caretaker needed for Whispering Pines Lodge. Room and board provided. Secluded location. Perfect for writers and artists seeking inspiration. Inspiration was exactly what Erin needed. Her once promising career as a novelist had stalled after her debut book, and her bank account was as empty as her creative well. Whispering Pines seemed like the perfect escape, a chance to reset, to find her muse again. The sun dipped below the horizon just as she spotted the lodge. It loomed at the end of the road, a massive structure of weathered wood and dark stone. The building seemed to blend into the forest around it, as if it had grown there naturally. A single light burned in one of the upstairs windows, casting a faint glow that did little to dispel the shadows. Erin parked her car and stepped out, shivering as the cool night air wrapped around her. She grabbed her suitcase and approached the front door, which was adorned with intricate carvings of pine trees and owls. A brass knocker in the shape of a wolf's head gleamed dully in the faint light. She hesitated for a moment before lifting the knocker and letting it fall with a resounding thud. The door creaked open almost immediately, revealing a tall, thin man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes. He wore a black suit that looked a century out of fashion, but his voice was warm and welcoming. "You must be Erin," he said, extending a hand. "Welcome to Whispering Pines. I'm Mr. Greaves, the lodge's steward." Erin shook his hand, surprised by how cold his skin felt. "Thank you. It's beautiful here," she said. Though beautiful wasn't quite the word she'd use. The lodge and its surroundings had a wild, almost menacing beauty, like a painting that grew more unsettling the longer you looked at it. "Come inside," Mr. Greaves said, stepping aside. "You must be tired from your journey." The interior of the lodge was just as imposing as the exterior. The main hall was cavernous, with a vaulted ceiling supported by massive wooden beams. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth cold and empty. The furniture was heavy and ornate, upholstered in dark, faded fabrics. The walls were adorned with taxidermy, deer heads, an owl with wings outstretched, and even a snarling wolf. "Your room is upstairs," Mr. Greaves said, leading her to a grand staircase. "Dinner will be served at 8. Until then, feel free to explore." Erin nodded, her footsteps echoing on the wooden floor as she followed him. Her room was at the end of a long corridor, its door marked with a brass number 7. Inside, the room was surprisingly cozy, with a 4-poster bed, a writing desk, and a window that overlooked the forest. A small fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. After unpacking, Erin decided to take Mr. Greaves up on his offer to explore. The lodge was a labyrinth of hallways and staircases, each turn revealing something new and strange. She found a library filled with dusty books, a game room with an antique billiards table, and a music room where a grand piano sat silently in the corner. But it was the basement door that gave her pause. Unlike the other doors in the lodge, this one was made of iron and secured with a heavy padlock. A faint rhythmic tapping sound came from the other side, like the ticking of a clock. Erin leaned closer, her curiosity piqued, but the sound stopped abruptly, as if it had sensed her presence. "That's off limits." Mr. Greaves's voice startled her, and she turned to see him standing at the end of the hallway. His expression was unreadable, but there was a note of warning in his tone. "It's just an old storage area. Nothing of interest down there." Erin nodded quickly and stepped away from the door, but the uneasy feeling lingered. She couldn't shake the sense that something was watching her, hidden in the shadows of the lodge. That night, Erin struggled to sleep. The bed was comfortable, and the fire kept the room warm, but her mind wouldn't stop racing. She kept thinking about the basement door and the strange tapping sound. Finally, she gave up on sleep and decided to write. She sat at the desk, opened her laptop, and stared at the blank screen. And then she heard it, a whisper. At first, she thought it was the wind, but as she listened, the whispers grew clearer, forming words that sent chills down her spine. "Help me!" Erin froze, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. The voice was faint and ethereal, like it was coming from far away. She stood up and walked to the window, but the forest outside was still and silent. The whisper came again, louder this time. "Help me, please!" It was coming from the hallway. Heart pounding, Erin grabbed her phone and stepped out of her room. The corridor was dark, lit only by the faint glow of moonlight streaming through a window at the far end. The whispers led her back to the basement door. The padlock was gone, and the door was ajar, revealing a staircase that descended into darkness. "Don't go down there." Erin jumped and turned to see a young woman standing behind her. She had long dark hair and wore a pale blue dress that looked like it belonged in another era. Her eyes were wide with fear. "Who are you?" Erin asked, her voice trembling. "My name is Lila," the woman said. "I used to be the caretaker here. You have to leave. This place, it's not what it seems." Before Erin could respond, Lila vanished, her form dissolving into the shadows like smoke. Erin stood there, her mind racing, before the whisper came again, more urgent than ever. "Help me!" Against her better judgment, Erin stepped through the door and began to descend the stairs. The air grew colder with each step, and the smell of damp earth filled her nostrils. At the bottom of the stairs, she found herself in a cavernous room, lit by a single flickering bulb. The walls were lined with shelves holding jars filled with unidentifiable substances. In the center of the room was a stone altar, and chained to it was a figure. It was Lila. Her wrists and ankles were bound with iron shackles, and her face was pale and gaunt. She looked up at Erin, her eyes filled with desperation. "Please," she whispered, "you have to break the chains, before he comes back." "Before who comes back?" Erin asked, but Lila didn't answer. Her gaze shifted to something behind Erin, and her eyes widened in terror. Erin turned slowly, her breath catching in her throat as she saw Mr. Greaves standing at the bottom of the stairs. But he was no longer the composed, elegant man who had greeted her. His eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and his mouth twisted into a grotesque grin that revealed rows of sharp, yellowed teeth. "I told you it was off limits," he said, his voice echoing unnaturally. "Now you'll have to stay." The last thing Erin saw before the world went dark was Lila's outstretched hand, reaching for her as Mr. Greaves' shadow enveloped them both. Weeks later, a new caretaker arrived at Whispering Pines. The job listing was the same, promising seclusion and inspiration. But the lodge was different now. In the library, a dusty laptop sat on a desk, its screen cracked and dark. And in the basement, the whispers continued, calling out for help to anyone who dared to listen.